Welcome, everyone. It's noon. We're going to have a lot of people still coming in, but I want to go ahead and get started. I want to make sure we have plenty of time for the congressman to share his thoughts on education, and then also for you folks to be able to have an opportunity to ask him questions. My name is Craig DeSessa, and I am the executive director of the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance. It's a coalition, statewide coalition of, we've got well over 700, maybe even 800 now, folks who have joined, along with major organizations. We do have partners in this that we work closely with. Many of you heard of the Thomas Jefferson Institute, Virginia Institute of Public Policy, Family Foundation, Heritage Action, and Americans for Prosperity. Those are our main partners that we work with. And that is, our goal is strictly to bring awareness to school choice that could potentially be here in Virginia. We don't have a lot, as you probably all know. We have very limited school choice. We do not have a culture of education choice, as I like to say, here in Virginia, like many other states do. Recently read an article, I read actually a couple of articles, even in the Wall Street Journal, they've talked about, they called 2021 the year of school choice. And in 2022, it surpassed 2021. So states are passing legislation like education savings accounts, tax credits, and things like that, more charter schools across the country because there's a demand for it. So here in Virginia, we're working hard to try to make that happen. What's going to happen here is, as I mentioned, the Congressman's going to share some of his thoughts on this, and then we're going to have an opportunity. I'm going to give an opportunity for people to ask questions. We got a lot of questions up front. When you registered, you probably saw that you could ask a question. We got a number of those. We'll go through a lot of those first, and then any other questions that we see in the chat, we can ask those for as much time as we have. As I said, we have Congressman Bob Good. We're really pleased and honored to have you, Congressman. Congressman Good has represented Virginia's 5th Congressional District in the 117th United States Congress since 2021, or January of 2021. He is a member of the House Freedom Caucus and has been named to the Budget Committee and the Education and Workforce Committee, where he is the chairman of the Health, Environment, Labor, and Pensions Subcommittee. Prior to his election to Congress, he served one term on the Campbell County Board of Supervisors from 2015 to 2019. Professionally, Congressman Good worked as the Senior Associate Athletics Director for the Development at Liberty University for 15 years, following a 17-year career with Citi Financial. Bob attended Liberty University and earned a Bachelor of Science in Finance and a Master's of Business Administration. Bob lives in Campbell County with Tracy, his wife of 34 years. They are proud parents of 3 adult children, Patrick, Sydney, and Connor. Congressman, take it away.
Thank you, Craig, and great to be with you. I want to thank the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance for the work that you do and for allowing me to participate with you today. I appreciate, Craig, your leadership and all the partners that are involved in this effort, this ongoing effort. As Craig was sharing the kind introduction, it reminded me of my time at Campbell County on the Board of Supervisors. And I will tell you that in my young political career, I've only been involved in politics about 7 years, but when I would say perhaps the greatest intensity that I experienced in the political world might be from my time in Campbell County dealing with education issues, because on the Board of Supervisors, I didn't believe that even the school system should get a blank check on how they spent taxpayer resources. I believe they ought to be accountable. And that really made me some enemies in my county, Campbell, just outside Lynchburg. And some of those political enemies even exist today. And I left the Board of Supervisors in 2019 was my last year. So before really this rose to the forefront to the degree that it has today. When I first decided to run for Congress in 2019 for the 2020 election, I named education as what I believe to be one of the greatest threats to the country from the very beginning. I said that I thought that our spending and our immigration policies were the two greatest threats, and then education being the 3rd greatest threat. And I can tell you nothing's changed my mind after my first 2.5 years in Washington. That's why I asked to be on the Budget Committee, deal with the spending piece of it. And I am heavy immersed in that side of the debt ceiling battle, but I also asked to be on the Education Committee. I will tell you, and by the way, on the call or with us today, we've got Courtney Sosnowski, who is my senior legislative assistant, who coordinates our education policy, does great work there. But she would tell you, and I would echo that, not many Republicans ask to be on the Education Committee in DC. It seems to be really popular with the Democrats, not so much with Republicans. And I wanted to be on that committee. I wanted to stay on that committee because we are literally, and I think that's, I'm preaching to the choir here, we're literally losing our country through our K-12 government education system and on our college campuses. And while your focus, I know, is your primary issue is the school choice, I'm going to speak a little more broadly to education from the federal perspective, as well as specifically on school choice issues. I'm the only Virginia Republican on the Education and Workforce Committee. When the Dems are in control, they call it Education and Labor. When we're in control, we call it Education Workforce. Thankfully, we are on the majority, or in the majority, it's Education Workforce. And as Craig said, I'm able to chair this year our subcommittee on health, employment, labor, and pension. So while that focuses more on the workforce side, privileged to be able to do to lead a subcommittee. But what I'm trying to do, of course, is to reduce the federal role in education and the harm that's being done by the policies that are already enforced. You probably, the nature of this organization, followed closely the Parents' Bill of Rights that we voted through. We passed out of the House. I guess it was back in February, or perhaps I think it was March, actually, Courtney would know specifically. But we passed that Parents' Bill of Rights. And we spent our office, that started early last year when we were in the minority, and trying to, it was in large part a reaction to Virginia. And I can tell you, being in DC and dealing with members of Congress from all over the country, Virginia, which is obviously top of mind to us, Virginia is top of mind across the country when it comes to education. Members of Congress all over the country know about Virginia's battles on the education side. Of course, they know about Glenn Youngkin's victory and us sweeping the statewide races, the 3 races a year ago, year and a half ago, and about us taking back 1 house of General Assembly. And they know all about Loudoun County and the things that have happened in our schools that have kind of elevated the profile of Virginia from an education standpoint. So we battled. So that's really where that Parents' Bill of Rights was kind of a reaction from our party leadership when we were in the minority a year ago. But it came out initially as a pretty weak bill. It didn't really have much teeth in it. It really wasn't addressing the concerns that most parents had, particularly coming out of the pandemic. And it didn't deal with CRT. It didn't deal with transgender policies. It didn't deal with masks and vaccines and lockdowns and shutdowns and a lot of the things that parents were concerned about. So we spent a year and a half in our office, again, Courtney working alongside me with that, try to make it stronger and make it better. And we were promised, hey, it'll be better when we're in the minority. I'm sorry, in the majority, we have control. And that really didn't happen. As we got into January, it was going to be kind of the same bill. So we really led the fight in amending that bill and making it stronger to deal with some of the issues that parents are most concerned about or that are negatively impacting our kids. And we got a lot of opposition, quite frankly, from our own party, our leadership. And they were telling us, hey, you're going to kill the bill. It's not going to pass if you make it stronger. One of the things, just to touch on briefly, one of the benefits that came out of the speaker battle that we had 4 months ago was empowering regular order, where you work through the committees of jurisdiction, and empowering regular members of Congress to have input in legislation to make amendments and try to improve it rather, and not have to vote it up or down with no changes, with no voice. So that allowed us to make amendments to this legislation. And we had 5 amendments that we got through to make it a little stronger. Things like notifying parents if their kid is being treated as a different gender at school. You got to let the parents know, not even prohibiting it, but just letting them know. And that parents were the only ones who could give vaccine authorization for their children at school, that the schools can't target parents through law enforcement for making their voices heard at school board meetings and through other channels. And that when a parent wants to look at curriculum in their respective kid's school, that you can't charge them exorbitant fees to do that. And you got to allow them to make copies of that curriculum. So those were the 5 amendments that we got through. There were some other amendments that came through because of this open process that we now have. On a side note, I'll just say that the college campuses, as to say the least, we got a lot of work to do there. But one side note, I'll just say, I continue to be amazed that we conservatives are literally paying the left tens of thousands of dollars to change how our kids think. We're paying them to beat us when we send our kids to these schools where they're going to get wokeified and indoctrinated, and where the mission on these college campuses is to take 4 years to change everything we've done over the previous 18 years. And I just, as a side note there, while we're trying to address that to some degree that we can with the proper role of the federal government, we've got to vote with our feet, with our dollars as well. And that's not really much time to get into that for this call. I will tell you, back to the Parents' Bill of Rights, though, there's some tension there with some of my closest allies in Congress, my conservative allies, between what's the federal role or involvement in education. Most of us believe, of course, constitutionally, there is no appropriate federal role in education. But because we are involved in it, we do have a Department of Education. I'm on a bill I'm a co-sponsor of a bill sponsored by my friend Thomas Massey, which is one sentence. It basically says Department of Education shall be eliminated at the end of this year. And I'm a co-sponsor on that bill, but we don't have a majority of Republicans. That's a tall order. So how do we work within the system to make it better? As again, the focus of this organization is in K-12, in our schools, we've got the focus on indoctrination over academic excellence. We've got anti-American curriculum, anti-capitalism, dishonest history, harmful policies, the CRT-related policies, that permeates every subject or every class that's taught. I know there's that worldview, if you will, harmful transgender policies, and of course, an overall desire to keep our kids in failing schools based on zip code. And as Craig talked about school choice, which again, I know is the primary focus of the organization, the reason why we have opposition in the Virginia General Assembly, and I would submit Virginia is the worst school in the country when it comes to school choice, because you can't be any worse than having zero school choice. And Virginia has no school choice. But I had a Democrat who's a local school board member in my home county, Campbell County, who's a friend of mine. We have a friendly relationship, but I was asking him how we can't get any Democrats to support school choice? How come we can't get any Democrats to support the Tebow bill, which I was trying to drive as a county supervisor? And he said to me, summed it up, he said, how many Democrats do you know who homeschool their kids? And, that's largely been the case. It's come from the conservative side of the homeschooling. And that's really, it's always about the money. And of course, they want not only just the control of our kids and the ability to indoctrinate our kids, but they also want the money that comes with those state and federal dollars based on the enrollment. As we all know, one of the bright spots that's come out of the pandemic, if you will, was the massive increase in parental and community engagement in our schools. There's strong reaction, as there should have been, to the vaccine mandates, the mask mandates, the school closures, the putting unions ahead of the students, and these other policies, harmful policies that were bad for our kids. And thankfully, what we're seeing across the state, certainly in my district and in my local community, are more conservative school board candidates, and we are winning because most parents are with us on the issues that we're championing. So we need to, again, continue to encourage folks to go to school board meetings. I go to a lot of school board meetings just to support parents across my district and encourage those to run for office and to change our school board, which of course is the mechanism that we have to impact our administration, which is so critical. There was a real clear opinion research survey just last year that showed 70% support across the country for school choice, 82% of Republicans, 68% of Democrats, and 67% of independents. So across the board, that's a winning issue. Democrats know that's a winning issue, and they know that they're losing, and that school choice is a winner politically, but it's also a winner for the kids and the families. At the end of last year, public school enrollment declined by over 1 million students, and I continue to tell parents the best thing to do for your kids, if you can, is frankly to remove them from government schools. Now, we know we've got some 80% of our kids that are in government schools, and that's not going to be the solution for a lot of parents. We're trying to help it make it a more viable solution with some of the legislation that Craig mentioned that I'm going to touch on in just a moment here. So we got to work to provide more options for the parents, but also try to improve the government schools where most of our kids are going to be. A bill that I have sponsored among many, but specifically the school choice, we have the Choice Act. And our bill that I've sponsored, which is not the one that Craig referenced, but the bill that we sponsored, our Choice Act bill, would quite simply allow federal Title I funds to follow the student to his or her public school of choice or to be deposited into a 529 educational savings account. So it would really help them with the public school, their choice, because some schools like Virginia, you get charged money if you go outside your district. But it would also be eligible to those funds to be used for private school, homeschool, or other educational expenses. So the federal dollars follow the child. That's a bill that we have sponsored. I'm also a co-sponsor on the legislation that Craig was referencing. Adrian Smith is the lead sponsor, and Burgess Owens, two of them together, but it's Educational Choice for Children Act. And that would permit individuals and corporations to get a tax credit for making charitable contributions to what are called scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs. And then those scholarship granting organizations, those SGOs, would deliver those scholarships directly to eligible students. There's a $10 billion cap on that. And we're proud to co-sponsor that bill as well. We just had in my Education Workforce Committee, again, we had a hearing on school choice just about 2 weeks ago. And we were, of course, questioning experts on school choice and how effective our education, our government schools. And of course, the consensus is overwhelmingly that the funding mechanisms and the federal overreach in education is not working for the majority of our parents and our families and their children. So there's other legislation that I'll just touch on that I've sponsored that's related. You know, what are we doing on the federal level to try to help? What are other things that we've sponsored relative to school choice, or other education issues? We sponsored a bill called Empowering Local Curriculum Act. And these were primarily sponsored when we were in the minority. Now we're trying to get movement on these legislation that were in the majority. But Empowering Local Curriculum Act, which clarifies that recipients of federal funds, schools that get federal funds, can't be required by the Biden administration to teach or promote critical race theory in schools. We've got our Defending Student Civil Rights Act, which would make it a violation of the Civil Rights Act to teach CRT in schools. If you're getting federal funding, you can't use that federal funding to teach CRT, which we believe is a violation of civil rights. We've got our Empowering Parents Act, which would create a private right of action or a legal remedy for parents to hold taxpayer-funded schools accountable if the school teaches harmful gender ideology or CRT. We've got our Students Before Unions Act, which would make this is kind of thankfully beginning to. We sponsored it during the previous session of Congress, and so thankfully it's beginning to not as relevant anymore. But it would make COVID education funding contingent upon the local jurisdiction, local school disclosing in writing the communication they've had with their teachers unions on reopening their schools. And that was, of course, trying to reveal that there was the teachers unions that were making the call across the country on whether or not schools were safe enough to reopen. We got earlier in this Congress, we got the emergency declaration declared over through legislation we passed through the House. We pressured the Senate into passing it, and the president signed it above his objections there. And now we're trying, by the way, in the debt ceiling bill that I've been really involved with in my role in the Budget Committee, but we're trying to claw back unspent COVID funds. There's tens of billions of dollars. It started out about 90 billion when we first started talking about it. And now the administration is trying to get that out the door as quick as they can before we can claw that back. It's to dwindle down to maybe 50 billion now, but obviously that money shouldn't be allocated now the emergency is over. We also had sponsored our Championing Our Parents Act, which would prohibit federal funds from being used to implement AG Garland's October 4 memo from a year and a half ago, targeting parents who show up at school board meetings, really illustrating what this federal government thinks of anyone who opposes them politically. And then finally, we sponsored a bill, and this is more recent, but the Federal Loan Student Integrity Act, which would legislatively block Biden's attempt at the student loan transfer scheme, where, of course, he's trying to make those who didn't borrow money for student loans or who paid off their student loans or worked their way through school so they wouldn't have to incur student loans or didn't go to college, how unfair, how unconstitutional, how illegal it is for this president to spend $500 billion transferring that student debt to taxpayers. So with that, those are the things that we've been working on in Washington, kind of a quick summary from a legislative standpoint. And Craig, I'll be happy to turn it back to you and take any questions that folks might have for me on this subject or anything else?
Well, we appreciate it. Wow, there's a lot going on up there in Congress relating to education, and truly appreciate what you guys are doing. A couple of comments. I'm glad you guys are dealing with the parental rights stuff. I mean, that's really important, as it's become somewhat of a battle line for between folks on the left who don't think that parents have the right to basically raise and educate their children the way they best see fit. We believe at the VEOA that school choice really provides the ultimate in parental rights. And that's why we're driving that so hard. It gives parents the right to decide where they want to educate their children. So that's, I think, really important. You mentioned something called the Choice Act. Tell me a little bit more about that. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, that's a bill that we sponsored. We're the lead sponsor on that, which would quite simply allow, again, the federal dollars allocated per child to go to the school option of the family's choice. So whether, again, that was to go towards a different public school, a different government school outside their district they want to go to without, here in our community, if you go to the next county, if you go from Campbell County to Bedford County, they'll charge you $3,000 a year in tuition to go to the next county over. Or if you want to go to a private school or a Christian school or cover homeschool expenses, they can be allocated that way through a 529 savings account. So, and now there's some limits in terms of those who are at a certain level relative to the poverty level. So it's not intended to help, of course, the wealthy students who can afford those choices, those options. It's intended to help middle and lower income Americans.
Yeah. So the federal funding, just for people to understand where that plays with all the funding that comes into the public schools, the federal funding is the least amount that goes towards a student. You have their local funding, which is typically the most, your state funding, and those range from anywhere from 50-50 to or 48-48, and then the rest is your federal. So typically what you see in these communities is around $1,000 to $2,500 is my recollection that goes towards a child in Title I. So you mentioned Title I, right? That's sort of the category for this money. So just I hadn't heard about that, but it's wonderful because it helps those kids, those parents, make a decision on how that money can be used. And if you put that with an ESA, for example, or you got the tax credit money, I mean, that gives parents lots and lots of flexibility. So that's great.
If I could just speak, this kind of brings together my budget committee, my education committee together. The federal government is the least efficient way to spend our taxpayer dollars, our hard-earned taxpayer dollars. And, it's much better, obviously, at the local level where there's more accountability, there's less red tape, there's less funnels that it has to go through to get to the intended recipients. And we have so much more influence over our county supervisors, our school board, than we do, obviously, Congress or the president. And to Craig's point, about 94% of the education funding in the country comes from state and local. And as he said, it tends to be a fairly close split between state and local, depending on the state, depending on the local community. And when I was in Campbell County as a supervisor, and even now as a congressman, I advocate, we ought to tell the federal government to take that meager amount and shove it, because as we know, no matter what government program we're talking about, not just education, whatever. When you take those federal dollars, that's what they use as leverage to bully, intimidate, threaten you into doing what they want you to do. And as I think probably most folks on this call would agree, you cannot draw a correlation across the country between the amount of dollars spent on education and the outcome that's received. And the government beast, even on the education side, will never be satisfied. There will never be enough. You've got cities, especially blue cities, where populations are going down, enrollments are going down, decreasing, and yet they're asking for more and more every year for their funding. There's got the administrative bloat, you've got non-academic efforts, obviously, and so many other things where those dollars are going. And it's really not worth it to suffer under the heavy oppressive hand of the federal government for the meager amount of the education dollars that come from the federal government. Now, to get school administrators and school boards and to understand and act on that, is obviously a tall order, and it scares people anytime you talk about reducing funding. But there's the mandates, the regulations, the burdens of complying with the federal government's requirements are not worth that meager amount of dollars.
No, and I would completely agree with that. But it's amazing how they use that as a hammer on these school boards and on the VDOE. I mean, they do it all across the state. Going back to the federal tax credit legislation you referred to, one of the challenges and pushbacks we're getting from the homeschooling community on an ESA, for example, is that they're very concerned that the federal government will, or the state government will have some strings attached. And that hasn't happened. Those ESAs have been introduced all over the country. It hasn't happened yet. That doesn't mean it can't happen. What is the federal tax legislation? How is that protecting homeschool parents and students from becoming entangled in the federal government? Are you familiar?
You're referring to one of these two pieces of legislation?
Oh, the federal tax credit program you said that goes to the SGOs.
Yeah, and that's the Adrian Smith bill that you were referring to. Let me go to where I can get a little more of my detail on that, because that's a newer piece of legislation for us, and I'm again a co-sponsor. That's not our legislation.
Okay.
But let's see. So what it does, it allows donors would front the money up front to the SGO, the scholarship granting organization, and then the government effectively reimburses them for that donation that they've made, gives them not a tax deduction, but an actual tax credit. So it's literally a dollar for dollar. Mm-hmm. There's a sort of a first come, first served cap on the bill, on the money, that it goes up to $10 billion. That at least in this initial legislation, this initial rollout of the policy. And so again, it's incentivizing individuals or organizations or corporations to give towards donate to these scholarship granting organizations, which will then allocate the money directly to the individuals from a scholarship standpoint. You don't have the Department of Education involved with it. It is directly from the taxpayer, the donor, to the organization, the scholarship granting organization, who then distributes the scholarships. And so it doesn't have the government involved with it directly.
Right.
And Craig and Representative Good, just to jump in, this is Will Estrada with Parental Rights Foundation. Homeschool Legal Defense and Parental Rights Foundation both support HR 531, the Educational Choice for Children Act. The way it was drafted, it doesn't bring in any concerns with government funding.
Right. And I would say that the homeschooling community is much more in favor of tax credit programs than they are the ESA at this time. We're hoping we can move them on that. But
well, there is reason, to your point, Craig, to be concerned anytime the government is allowing something. Then the government can put, conditions on that, of course, and that's the whole problem with funding from. That's why local government control of schools is so important, because we have so much more influence over our local community, our local government, our school board and our board of supervisors, our city councils, than we do even the state legislators. We have more control of the state legislators than we do the federal. But you're right, that's the condition, that's the risk, I should say, whenever you're dealing with federal dollars or state dollars.
Yeah, there's always the chance that could happen, right? If the Democrats end up with a trifecta at the federal level, or it's certainly always at risk. Here's another question. The source of much of the current problems in education is rooted in what students are being taught at the college level. And what can be done about this limiting funding to non-compliant colleges and universities? That's what we're seeing here in the state level, is that these teachers are coming out of these colleges and they're completely indoctrinated and they completely believe in what they're teaching. And it's all one-sided. So what is there any attempts at the federal level to control our universities?
Courtney knows, my legislative assistant, again, who's on here with me, that I tried to get on the higher education subcommittee, tried to chair that, and even our own party didn't let me do that. They put me on the workforce, or the help one, the labor and pensions and employment, health, labor and pension employment, because I think they were afraid of how far I would try to go with attacking what you're talking about here on the higher ed side. And so we sit on that committee, but I'm not the chair of that subcommittee, I should say. But yeah, there's so many different ways we need to attack this, because you've got discrimination, obviously, against free speech, suppression of free speech. You've got consequence of those professing or expressing a conservative worldview. We have reports of students telling us that their teachers tell them if you write or you do papers and things from a conservative political worldview, you're going to get a negative grade. So they have to hide their views and to publish or write or do their work from a liberal, progressive, I hate to say that, we shouldn't even say progressive, but a liberal, communist, Marxist, leftist worldview in order to get a decent grade on their papers. One of the college system is so messed up, and what we've got to do, I think, again, is we ought to be sending our kids to faith-based schools, those few conservative schools that are out there, and again, vote with our feet, vote with our dollars, and stop fund. We buy into the world or the left's definition of what they think the prestigious schools are that we all got to send our kids to, and then they come out. 90% of kids that go into those campuses come out believing something very different than they went in. And we think, okay, my kid's going to be a Daniel, my kid's going to be a Joseph. They're going to stand alone. They're not going to be impacted. They're going to, being on that island. And most kids just aren't able to do that. But we are, we're trying to limit, one of the things is tenure, where professors, you can't get rid of a professor because of tenure. And I don't think that's a healthy thing. I don't think that's a good thing. And we've got that in all of our state schools. There are some private institutions that don't have tenure because they want to be able to get rid of their faculty if their faculty gets off base. And we don't have that in so many of the schools across the country, even private and public schools. We allow foreign influence on our college campuses. I don't think it ought to be legal for us to take dollars on our college campuses from our foreign adversaries who are working against us, against the United States, and yet we allow them to fund tens of millions of dollars worth on our college campuses. So there are so many, and it's tougher on the college campuses certainly than it is in the K-12. I think we can make progress there more easily, although that's a behemoth as well. But we have got real battles on the college campuses. I think we ought to be requiring schools with massive endowments, multi-billion-dollar endowments, to utilize those resources to lower tuition. We ought to look at, another thing we want to do is to take the dollars that's federal dollars that are available to kids for grants or student loans, to be able to use those for apprenticeship programs, certificate programs, other things other than traditional four-year schools where they get massive amounts of debt for a degree that they're not going to use because you can't use those dollars for non-traditional school options in so many cases. So it is a real battle on the go, and we're having hearings to address what's going on college campuses and to try to expose it and to see what we can do to help protect free speech, free thought, to address discrimination against those with a conservative worldview, because it is a real problem.
Yeah, and on the local level, and many of you probably aware of this, there's organizations that are alumni organizations that are forming all across the state, from UVA, VMI, and so forth, that are going to their leadership and their school that they went to and saying, look, we're going to stop giving you money if you continue down this path. So attacking their money supply is a really
it's always about the money.
Yeah, it's a very effective way to get them to change. And so if you guys went to any of these institutions, or you ladies, I certainly would look up those organizations. You can email me at info@veoa.org to find out what they are. But there's a real effort to really hit them in the pocket, and that's something we can do here locally. Here's another question. This is really close to home for you, Congressman. Crystal Coleman is in Campbell County, and she says, we have a resolution against divisive concepts, yet the school systems never officially notified any employee or its expectations. How then do we enforce our CRT? And so I guess that would be more of a, as your experience on the Board of Supervisors, how can we ensure that the schools are enforcing that?
The left obviously contradicts themselves constantly, and they talk out of both sides of the mouth. On the one hand, they say, oh, we don't have CRT in schools. What is CRT? We don't have CRT in schools. That's a graduate level theory for graduate level college kids. But yeah, CRT, but then they'll defend CRT, how awesome it is. It doesn't exist, but it's really awesome. And as we know that we don't have I'm aware of across the country, we don't have a class called CRT, critical race theory, in schools in Virginia and probably across the country, in K-12 education. However, and it's funny, I was in a neighboring county from Campbell, where I live, right next door, where I was at a school board meeting. We were talking about this issue, and this is about maybe a year and a half ago. They said, we don't do CRT, we do culturally responsive teaching. And I thought, gosh, you probably should come up with a different acronym for culturally responsive teaching, because and as we know, what CRT is it's the framing for an issue. It's the explanation for why things are as they are, how things have been, how things are. It's the way that we look at or explain an issue, or we explain how our country is or what we are today. And it permeates every aspect of history and social sciences, and just all, how we present the material, how we present our country, how we present our history, how we present our world today. And it just permeates. And of course, as you know, we've seen so many examples of teachers getting caught, administrators getting caught in conversations they're having with their orientation or their training or what have you. And it comes up, hey, we want to hide this from the parents. We're going to use these different terms. We're not going to call it CRT. We're going to call it something else, but we're going to present these concepts. And so it is throughout our school system. And that's why it's so important for parents to be engaged in what their kids are being taught, to be looking at the curriculum, to be showing up at the school board meetings, to be holding accountable our school boards. Our school boards tend to just listen to what the administrator says. The school board hires a friendly administrator, and then they listen to the administrator. And most of the school board members typically are former school administrators or teachers themselves, or part of the system. You've sort of got the foxes watching the hen house. And so you can't overstate the importance of, and quality school board candidates running, taking back the schools, when necessary, firing their school superintendent, to get someone who shares, our worldview, if you will, our view of education. It was wonderful, as we all know, a year and a half ago, for Terry McAuliffe to accidentally speak the truth and to say what we know that the other side believes, that parents don't have the right to have the primary voice in their kids' education, or for that matter, the primary voice in just bringing up their kids. The left believes the kids belong to the government. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that sound Marxist? Doesn't that sound like a oppressive, tyrannical state like we've seen around the world history and around the globe today? But that is what the left believes. And that's why it is so important for us. We're losing our country. Again, I know this is at the outset. We are losing our country through our education system. And that's why it is such a great threat to our country.
Yeah, and I would add that at the risk of self-promotion, the Middle Resolution PAC, which is another organization I'm involved with, is actively interviewing candidates for school board right now. And just lately had an interview before this call, and a wonderful woman who's extremely bright, believes all the things that we believe on this call. So I would encourage you, those of you on this call, wherever you live, get involved with your school board candidates, help them get elected, and we can flip school boards. And that's how we enforce the CRT regulations. That's how we enforce getting rid of divisive teachings in these schools. Because, I mean, most parents and even principals, this woman shared a story with us that she went to her principal because her son, who was a junior, was clearly in a class that was trying to indoctrinate him on gun control. And the principal said, I had no idea this was going on. So it's incumbent upon us to get involved in these school board races across the state. It really is. We can have huge impact if we get involved locally.
We absolutely can win there, and we are winning there when we do it, because there is more of us than them when it applies to this issue. The other side is a small, loud, vocal, aggressive minority, and we have the numbers to vote them out. Most parents agree with us on this issue. And I saw something pop up, one of the questions, say, hey, wish we had elected school boards in their particular county. But, we do have elected board of supervisors, and we do have elected city and town council and so forth. And so if you don't have the elected school boards, you certainly can elect those who will support. You can elect conservatives who will support and appoint conservative members of the school board as well. And there really isn't any more important position politically than that first level of local legislators as well as school board members.
Yeah, and I would reiterate what you just said about getting to your board of supervisors. If you have an appointed school board, in which I am in favor of appointed school boards over elected school boards for a lot of reasons that we're not here to discuss. Maybe we can have another call on that. But if you are in a community like that, go get involved with your board of supervisor because they appoint those school board members. I'm going to switch gears real quick here. A number of questions that came in early when people registered. There's a question about the harm that's being done to students on wireless digital devices being used in public schools. Congressman, is there anything that you've come across where they're trying to address that at the federal level? Because it's been one on these school board interviews when we talking to these candidates. This is the most common issue that comes up other than safety, and that is these Chromebooks that kids have access to.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any legislation that's actually working towards the floor on the House side. And Courtney, feel free to jump in to correct me if there's something that I'm missing there. Certainly hear a lot about the issue, both on the House side and both on the Senate side. You have inescapably to me had this, or incomprehensibly to me, that we have some reluctance in some cases to deal with this or to address this. In some cases, you've got, based on frankly, the beholden nature of some legislators to donations from big tech that are hesitant to people that you wouldn't think so on maybe the side of the aisle for which most of the folks on this call probably vote, who are unwilling to confront big tech. And I'm also not going to say that it's because of political donations, but all you have to do is look at where a lot of their money is coming from. And they couch that in the neighborhood, oh, these are private companies and we shouldn't have the heavy hand of government, getting involved with private companies, and hey, we got to have competition and free market system. But big tech is a totally different animal. When you can monopolize the marketplace and you can suppress competition, when you're effectively censoring the free exchange of ideas, the free exchange of speech, when you're controlling elections based on information, that's allowed to pass through or not pass through your platform, you're deciding what stories and information can get out and what cannot get out. There's tremendous imagined power that these organizations have now, and it's a very small number. You're just talking about the Apple, Google, Twitter to some degree, Facebook. These just a handful of companies that are controlling so much of the information and so much of the media. Frankly, they're stealing the content from local media. That's why local media is disappearing. And it is a real problem. And then, of course, beyond that, you've got the TikTok, which is China is using to poison the minds of our children, to control our children, allowing things to happen here they wouldn't allow to happen in their own country. And, I'm certainly in favor of banning TikTok. Again, I'm not on a committee that has jurisdiction on this issue. That would fall in the judiciary on the House side. But it is a real problem. Obviously, social media and technology is a real problem, and it's impacting our young people. It's causing all kinds of emotional issues, psychological issues, loneliness, depression, suicide being on the rise, isolation. You think about what social media is. In order to get attention, even with your so-called friends, you have to stand out. You have to be impressive. You have to be unique. So you got to look a certain way. You got to perform a certain way. And so there's this artificial sort of almost middle school-like popularity contest through social media, which is really, really unhealthy. And it really has the total opposite effect of what the pretend world would suggest that it has in terms of connecting people. It really doesn't do that.
Yeah, and I would again reiterate what we talked about school boards. I mean, this is, I'm always very cautious about having the federal government control things like this, and this needs to be controlled at the local level, and it can be by the school board. And so again, get involved with your school boards and help them develop good policies. I think that the technology can be beneficial in many ways, but they need to figure out how to use it, because right now parents have no idea. They claim they do. The school boards claim they do, but parents really have no idea what their kids are accessing on these Chromebooks or whatever technology they have. Here's a question. Somebody wanted to know if if you can confine the federal tax credit program with other programs in states like our EISTC program, which is basically another tax credit program at the state level. Do you know, Congressman, if there's anywhere in there that restricts that?
To combine it with state?
Yes.
Tax?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work, with a totally different tax code system from state versus
You
federal.
definitely can.
Well, you would be able to. I think the way it would work. Peter Murphy, you have some input on that.
Yeah, you definitely can. That's the beauty of it, that in a state like Virginia, and by the way, thank you, Congressman Good, for your leadership and your perspective on this. It's enormously important and appreciated. You can take the federal, so the SGOs, scholarship granting organizations, would get these private donations, not government money, as Will said earlier. And they can give out scholarships on top of what students are getting from other.
So you mean not
Based
combined, but
programs.
stacking it, that we can do both?
Correct.
Yeah,
They can
stack.
They can stack it, which is critical, especially for that high school continuum where tuition's more expensive and where a lot of school choice people can get lost and not be able to continue, that education freedom in high school. And I think importantly, this, the ECCA respects federalism and that education is a state and local role. It's not playing a role in education, it's empowering parents. And I hope your colleagues, Congressman Good in Congress, I hope that message can spread with your other colleagues who are rightly, as you are, skeptical of kind of this federal and education in the same sentence. The ECCA is really the counterpunch to the relentless federalization of education by the left in this country. And so again, thank you for your leadership.
Yeah.
Well, so is everybody here from Virginia, Craig? This would be limited to Virginia.
Yeah, I would say a majority, 95%, if not all.
Well, your legislators need to hear from you, and thank you, Peter, for weighing in on that. And we don't have universal support for school choice among my side of the aisle. We should, but there are some who are afraid. And I'm in a somewhat purplish district, by the way. I've got the most liberal part of the state in my district. And only won with 52% the first time I ran, and then thankfully we got 57% this last time. But I have to remind my colleagues up in DC on my side of the aisle who think I'm in some 75% red district that no, we're actually in a competitive district. But your legislators need to hear from you that you want support for school choice, because we need to be bold and we need to show courage. It doesn't matter what you believe if you're not willing to take risks to fight for what you believe. And I won't say who it is, but probably the most well-known member of Congress that's identified kind of as a conservative leader, that people know who this person is. He will often say that he thinks that the number one issue to demonstrate where you are politically, like in other words, whether or not you support someone for office, a candidate or a member of Congress, is school choice. And he likes to say, if you're right on school choice, you tend to be right on every other issue. If you're wrong on school choice, you tend to be wrong on every other issue. And so I knew that you all would appreciate that. That would be said, at least he says it within our conference, by someone who many think is kind of the conservative leader on our side.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off of what Peter just said, just so people understand. In Virginia, we have the Education Improvement Scholarship Tax Credit Program, which is essentially the same program that Congressman Good has endorsed at the federal level. In Virginia, you can give money to a scholarship granting organization as an individual, as a corporation. And in Virginia, it's only a 65% tax credit, which is unfortunate. It's a low tax credit. It's the second lowest in the country. But nonetheless, it is a tax credit. And these SGOs, then parents apply for a grant or money to send their kid to a private school. It's only for children or families that earn 300% or below the poverty line. So it is targeted for low income. Whereas I believe the federal tax credit is for everybody, right? It's for every family.
The SGO, well, our choice bill, Courtney, what is it? 400% of the poverty level for our school choice bill, Choice Act. I think it's 400 for us. For Adrian Smith's bill, I forget what the qualifier specifically is on that one.
It's 300% of the median income. So it's really, it's a middle class. It helps children up, and it helps basically everyone but non-wealthy kids.
Okay, so that's the federal tax.
Everyone but wealthy kids, excuse me.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, so anyway, so it would be two separate programs, and as Congressman Good and Mr. Murphy said, you can stack those two on top of each other. And the way the education success accounts are written in Virginia is that we don't address that at all, and so that parents could use that money as well. So it'd be an opportunity. It'd be an opportunity for parents to have plenty of money to go to a decent private school or homeschool, which is what a lot of parents are choosing to do today. Switching gears a little bit here, Congressman, what will be done to stop Biden's Title IX changes to ensure that boys can't compete against our daughters and invade their locker rooms? Are you following that battle? I'm sure you are.
And Title IX, and I'm a former college wrestler, so I've been immersed in Title IX policy for a long time. But Title IX, probably everyone knows, it's a part of the 1972 civil rights legislation that says you cannot discriminate in education. It doesn't specifically deal with sports. It's been increasingly interpreted and more broadly interpreted over the last 50 years, particularly during Democrat administrations, to apply more boldly and aggressively towards equal outcome in athletics in terms of opportunities, participation, dollars, and so forth. And this administration, of course, is trying to threaten federal funds if you restrict education participation to biological gender versus identified gender. And so what it's going to take, and we just passed a bill out of the House to defend women and girls in sports, to say that you could, if you're receiving federal dollars, that you cannot allow biological males to obviously compete with women and girls in sports. And so now that, of course, we need, and that does a couple of things. It only came out of the House, but when you pass legislation out of the House right now, when that's the only side that we control, even if it may not become law, it does a couple of things. There's value in doing it. Number one, it exposes the issue to a greater degree on who the left is. And gosh, if anything illustrates who the Democrat Party is or what they've become, it's their views, their anti-science views. We are 100% male or female. Every one of our trillion or so cells is either 2X or XY, and there's nothing we can do to change that, no matter how we cosmetically alter ourselves or how we present ourselves. And but the Democrat Party, of course, not only wants indoctrination on that issue, which is caused multiple, you've went, by the way, from having 0.2% of children just 6 or 7 years ago that would identify as having some degree of gender dysphoria or gender confusion, I call it. Now it's a full 1%, which is a 5,000% increase because of policies in our schools, treatment in our schools. And it used to be 60% boys. Now it's 80% girls. It's changed because it's become the peer pressure thing to do. And it's just, and instead of supporting children and helping them realize God created them perfectly, God doesn't make any mistakes, they're 100% male or female, we pressure parents into thinking, oh gosh, if you don't embrace this child gender confusion, then your child's going to commit suicide, which of course the studies show just the opposite is true, how you cause so much harm to them emotionally, psychologically, and mentally when you support that confusion in the negative way and reaffirm that confusion. And of course, the left is so strategic, and they call surgery to maim and irreparably harm children is gender affirming care. Who can be against affirming care? That sounds like a nice, gentle thing when it is nothing but that. But us passing legislation at the House, again, illustrates who the Democrat Party is, highlights the issue, makes them vote against it, and shows the American people what we would do if they would reward us with more power in the next election. But ultimately, there's this broad authority within the, or latitude, I guess I should say, from the federal branch, the executive branch, I should say, to interpret and apply law unless Congress overrides it with clear legislation to clarify, or it's challenged legally through the court system. And of course, that's where the judicial branch comes in, is to actually The executive branch applies the law the way they see it. The legislative branch makes the law, and we can override with legislation what the executive branch does, or the judicial branch can challenge it. But it takes someone with standing to actually, file a challenge to that. And you are beginning to see some lawsuits emerge by those who are harmed directly by these policies, not just the competitive side of it or the anti-competitive side of it, but of course, the invasion of privacy and safety and just the insanity about, in the most recent example, one of you knows, but I forget what state it was, where we had the 18-year-old male, go into the locker room and expose himself to 14-year-old females. And he says, hey, it's cool, I'm trans.
Mhm. Yeah, it is a huge problem. I believe it is probably the worst problem we have in our schools today, because it's totally flipped our culture upside down.
Forgive me, but it shows how appeasement never works.
Yeah.
You back up and surrender, and you draw a line, you back up and surrender, and you try to accommodate anti-truth, frankly, righteousness, biblical values, quite frankly, that our nation was founded upon. And we're going to redefine sex, we're going to redefine morality, we're going to redefine family, we're going to redefine gender. And this is where it leads us. And the left will never be satisfied, and they will keep advancing until think about this. It's literally this issue alone. They really want to just change who and what we are as a country.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. We've talked about a lot of things that are somewhat negative, talked about some positive things. Congressman Good, we're getting close to the end here. We have a few more minutes. Would you just share with us some of the positives you're seeing out of Congress and some of the encouraging things you can tell us about that's going on?
Well, I believe that the majority of Americans are with us. We've talked a lot about these education issues, school choice issues, but they're also with us on common sense, I think, morality issues. Despite what the media would tell us, the younger generation is more pro-life, by the way. There's hope there. That it's the college kids and the high school kids are the ones that are showing up to the life rallies. The American people, the greatest representation of where the country is politically is the House of Representatives from a national standpoint. It's not the Senate, which, as we know, is not proportionate to population. You've got 2 in California and 2 in Delaware, for example. But the House, which is proportional to population, and a greater indicator even than the White House, because the White House, of course, is the electoral electoral college winner take all. So it's not exactly proportionate. That's how come you can have electoral victory without a popular vote victory. But it's the House that represents where the people are. And the American people gave us control for a reason. Thankfully, the Republican House is united and largely united. Obviously, there's different views. We've got moderates and conservatives and everything in between. Where the Democrat Party, they're all radical, crazy, Marxist, leftists, in my view. I'm sorry to be too partisan there. But the Republican House is largely united. The debt ceiling bill that we just passed was driven by the conservatives, was driven by the House Freedom Caucus. We were the first ones to come out with that proposal about 2 months ago. That became largely the Republican proposal we brought out of the House. Speaker McCarthy is showing strength of leadership, and he's saying, hey, we've already negotiated the bill. This is the deal to raise the debt ceiling. The Senate's got to pass it. The White House has got to sign it to avoid whatever consequences that would come with hitting a debt ceiling, which, by the way, would not be a default. Let me encourage you with that. There will be no default. A default is when you don't pay the interest on the debt. And we've got far more than enough tax collections revenue to pay the interest on the debt to avoid. The only way we would have a default is if Janet Yellen decided not to pay the interest on the debt. We've got more than enough money to fund Social Security, Medicare, veterans, military, and to pay the interest on the debt. If we don't get the debt ceiling raised because the Senate and the White House are obstinate and don't take the deal that's been negotiated at the House, that the way we could get to a majority to pass it, spend 2 months doing that while the Senate and the White House were on the sidelines, then it would just force us to prioritize our discretionary spending, which we need to do anyway. So the markets will get jittery, the media will try to scare everybody, and so will the White House, but there really is not a reason to be fearful about that. Now, that said, if we hold our resolve on the House side, I'm confident the Senate will pass our bill, and I believe the president will sign it, because they cannot abide by government not fully functioning and all the programs that are harmful and unjustified that they want to continue with your tax dollars. So they're going to want to cut that deal. So there's hope on the horizon. I think if we do what the American people elected us to do, we'll get a larger majority in 24. The Senate map looks really good for us in 24. It did not look good for us in 20. In 22 rather. The Senate map was reversed in 22, where we had much more exposure in purple or blue states with Republicans holding seats. It's the total opposite in 24. You've got far more Democrat seats up for election and re-election in red states or purple states. The map looks really good for us. We got to earn the American people's trust to give us a stronger majority in the House, the majority in the Senate, and the White House. And I think if we do the right thing in the House this next year and a half, that we'll earn that.
Thank you so much. And in closing, I just want to thank everybody here for joining us. And I know all these people on this call are in the fight, and that's what it's going to take. It's going to take all of us. Just one last thing. Next month, we're going to be talking with Melvin Adams for Noah Webster Education Foundation and Sherry Story from this School Board Members Alliance, which is a new school board organization to help support school board members who are tired of hearing from the Virginia School Board Association, which has been misleading them on a lot of issues over the years. So I encourage you to join us next month. It'll be the first Thursday of the month. I can't remember the date. Anyway, thank you again, Congressman Good. It's been wonderful to have you, and everybody else have a wonderful day.